So we're going to be talking about a big topic today, probably like the end sequence of the series, maybe, or at least one of the last ones, I suppose. And I got my boys again with me. The Jujutsu Kaisen Avengers are back. We got Fake Weeb, No Operator, and Quirkless Shinobi. And like I said, we're going to be talking about the big curse merger. I've already read the title of this video, so you know what we're getting into. So let me just explain what this thing is in case you need to be brought up to speed. So Kenjaku really explains this fully in chapter 202 when he's talking to Choso, and he basically says that I've always considered the possibilities of cursed spirits along with sorcerers. The new form of cursed energy may be attained by raising cursed spirits to the next level. And that's essentially what he was expecting with making Choso and the other Cursed Womb death paintings, but they didn't turn out the way that he wanted to, and he actually says that he's disappointed, and that's pretty funny. But he says that an evolved Tengen is more cursed spirit than human, so merging Tengen with non-sorcerers in Japan means 100 million people becoming cursed spirits with cursed energy. And then if you throw in a distillation process like Uzumaki, he wonders, what form would that take? And then we see a vision of this huge cursed creature thing. It's the size of Tokyo Tower, or at least it's almost as tall as that. It's just the size of multiple city blocks. It's like this massive thing. This is basically everything that Kenjaku has been working towards for I don't know if this was his goal for all the 1,000 years or whatever, but a majority of that time it seems like that's what he's been working for. And he's kind of just doing it because he's a mad scientist and it would be fun, but also it kind of ties into maybe what Tengen ultimately wants just for society and the world to become in general. So let me pass it off to Quirkless Shinobi. What are your just initial thoughts on this merger thing?
My initial thoughts on the merger was I thought Kenjaku was lying because the merger was simply it's an end game event where everybody has to die. But more recently, we see that the characters are actually going to be able to survive this, at least temporarily. And really, the Culling Games itself is supposed to be this unreasonable ritual. And Kenjaku says to Urame earlier in the story that when you're making a ritual this unreasonable, there has to be a unreasonable binding vow to end it. And really, I think the end goal of the merger itself is probably related to Yuji, because Kenjaku's whole plan is really optimizing cursed energy. He says this to Yuki, and when Yuki brings up oh, I want to remove cursed energy, Kenjaku says, he's legitimately offended and says, no, it lies in optimizing cursed energy.
So I think, obviously, the biggest thing that Kenjaku wants to achieve is unstoppable chaos. And Quirkless, you hit the nail on the head with the fact that, for some reason, as Zhoniin also mentioned, Choso, the death paintings, were failures in Kenjaku's eyes. And in his words, I think he also says something along the lines of, you guys were too ordinary. You ended up just being, a special grade curse, quote unquote, with the ability to use blood manipulation, but with an unlimited source of blood. That's not what Kenjaku was looking to do. As Quirkless pointed out, there's multiple different times in the story where Kenjaku is not only clearly interested in Yuji in the background, where Yuji's not even there, so you can't even say that Kenjaku is playing a character or trying to come off a certain way to Yuji. He's literally thanking his friends in the background. So I think the ultimate question is, what makes Yuji so unordinary? What makes Yuji so special that makes him think that he is different than Choso and the other death paintings? And it ultimately comes down to, as you mentioned, Kenjaku wants to stay with cursed energy and unleash unstoppable chaos that he can't even control. So I think whatever Yuji is that makes it so special, and whatever he has to do with the merger, it may even be something that Kenjaku's not even sure of himself.
Yeah, and speaking about Yuji, maybe that's who Kenjaku was referring to when he said his will shall be inherited, or his will shall be carried on, depending on which translations you read. And yeah, when Kenjaku mentions his will, I would assume it's referring to someone continuing on with the merger plan, since, as we've discussed, that's what Kenjaku has been planning for thousands of years. And so I don't know if he's saying that Yuji will indirectly somehow continue the merger, or if he's talking about someone else, because like we've all said, Kenjaku is a mad scientist at the end of the day, having a curse technique that can basically allow you to live on forever. So Kenjaku probably finds like many flaws and I guess imperfections throughout living so long, and flaws about Jujutsu Society and how it's going, how it's progressing. And he just wants to, like we said, evolve it somehow. See the curiosity of making this merger if he can, I guess, quote unquote, as Zhoniin said, form a new sense of cursed energy. And I don't know, for some reason, also when Kenjaku said that he felt like a kid holding a crayon, I mean, I personally wouldn't do what he does if I had his curse technique in his mind, but I can at least get, like I said, behind his sense of curiosity.
That's what I was thinking too. Like, damn, this is like a cool prospect. Like, I'm not exactly entirely against this. I mean, I don't want innocent people to die, but man, it is such an intriguing thing when he, lays it out the way that he does.
Well, to Fake Weeb's point, one of the big things that keeps popping up is Kenjaku wants to do this thing that he can't control, and I think one thing that is a little poetic is, of course, we know that he needed to manipulate Tengen as a cursed spirit in order to merge all of Japan, or all of the innocent lives in Japan, with the cursed spirit to unleash this merger. I think it's interesting that if Kenjaku represents pandemonium, he represents chaos. If you really think about it, Tengen is the exact opposite, which is why I think Tengen is such a primal and important part of this entire plan. And to Fake Weeb's point, because the inheriting will is so vague, that entire quote, it could mean Yuji, it could mean so many different things. It could also mean Tengen. Tengen could be released if Kenjaku literally is dead. And in my opinion, Tengen represents the exact opposite of what Kenjaku is. If Kenjaku is chaos, Tengen is order. He's the one that maintains all of the barriers. He's the one that set up Jujutsu Society and had a whole cult that worshipped him because he's the one in the Nara period, or another different period, that brought Jujutsu to this area of the world. And to the point where Tengen represented that order so much that he could have stopped the culling game at any point in time, but that would have required him to potentially lose that order and lose that grip he had, and then you'd have to rebuild it all from the get-go. And instead of doing that and taking the easy way out, he tried to keep the status quo and tried to let these Jujutsu High students take the ball game, and look how that turned out. So I think ultimately the Tengen and Kenjaku and even Yuji, this merger, whatever it is, have to all be tied together in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's really interesting to think of, like, maybe the merger is just, an allusion to something else, or, actually there's another goal in mind past the merger.
I think when it comes to Tengen and Kenjaku, they were friends at one point, and back in the Heian period, there's a lot we don't know. But Tengen had Sukuna's body at the bottom of one of their barriers, the foundation barriers of all of Jujutsu. And Sukuna mentions Tengen as knowing his body as if, like, a more personal manner. So I'm assuming they all work together at some point, and Sukuna being the Fallen, it brings up a lot of questions. But the biggest thing for me is that I don't think Kenjaku is actually as much about chaos as he wants people to believe. When we see him talking to Tengen, he says, "Oh, it was your fault for trusting that thing. The true purpose of the culling games is," and then he gets cut off. So I'm guessing this isn't the first culling games. When Tengen is initially talking about the culling games and explaining it to everybody, she talks about it as though it's a ritual they've performed before. And currently, we have no idea what brought Sukuna or Tengen to look like these, four-armed creatures or these four-eyed people. They say Tengen is closer to a cursed spirit, and it's due to, ascending, but what that means for Sukuna, we'll have to see. But the bigger thing here is, when it comes to Yuji and Kenjaku constantly says, "I expect much from you, Yuji," and Yuji's real power is, well, he's a vessel. So when I hear the merger creature, the combination of cursed energy, or the conglomerate of cursed energy from all the culling games, I wouldn't be surprised if that's intended for Yuji, and he is the will that Kenjaku wants to be inherited.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because Yuji has to have some kind of grand purpose, and he's already exhibiting some kind of special type of thing that he can do already. I mean, when he came back and hit Sukuna a couple chapters ago, it reverberated. He was like, "What's this?" And it always takes me back to what Kenjaku said in chapter 202, what we talked about in the beginning. The new form of cursed energy may be obtained by raising cursed spirits to the next level. And Yuji is somewhat of an experiment. I mean, no, he literally is, just the way that Choso is. Now, I'm not saying that, he had the whole purpose of making Yuji to have this new form of cursed energy, but maybe eventually he could create it, because that could be like Yuji's special thing. Like, he doesn't have a curse technique. He doesn't really have anything. He just hits real hard. It has divergent fists sometimes and then black flash occasionally. So maybe he develops a new form of cursed energy, and that has something to do with what they ultimately want. But that's a interesting point that you bring up, Shinobi, about how the culling game was maybe performed in the past, because it's like, who made the culling game? It's like this thing that could just come to be if you just do all the right things. So somebody had to make it, and it's implied that Kenjaku didn't. So that also brings up the other point of like Tengen, Sukuna, and Kenjaku were probably all working together at some point. And since Tengen was originally a woman, it always takes me back to like the big three concept in shonens, how there's like, two males. There's the lead with the buzz cut, then there's the Sasuke type, and then there's, the token female. And that lines up right there. So they could have been like the original, Megumi, Yuji, and Nobara. And then, I don't know, things went south or whatever. And going back to Sukuna, he obviously has some kind of part in all of this. And he did some kind of binding vow, maybe multiple, with Kenjaku, which still hasn't like fully come to fruition, I guess. So it makes me wonder, like, is this what Sukuna wants? Does he ultimately want to fight against this big curse merger thing? Like, what do you think about that? If this does happen? Because another thing that's like has me not too fully sure if it is going to happen is like, will Gege go as far as to killing 100 million Japanese people so that his plot can progress to the point of where he's already foreshadowed it multiple times? And as we've seen, like, he's not afraid to kill people, but is he gonna commit mass genocide in like his own series? Like, what do you think about that?
I've wondered the same thing. I mean, recently with them talking about them being able to survive as sorcerers with this whole thing, it makes me wonder a little bit more if it might actually happen. But if it does happen, that's pretty much a doomsday event for 99% of Japan. And it's happened before in anime, we have it with Attack on Titan and the Rumbling, and that just mass amounts of people die, but I don't know if they're going to do that here, especially in Shonen Jump magazine.
Yeah, they might do it, I don't know, maybe show it less, like show it not show much of it happening. I don't know, just like skip to the merger just being born. I don't know, like, because that's the thing. The reason why Kenjaku just hasn't started yet in the first place is because, like we talked about, there's a condition for the culling games to end, and for the culling games to supposedly meet its end, all the players except Kenjaku and Sukuna have to die. I know Quirkless brought up the point that some sorcerers will be able to survive the culling games, but I think first before that, like, still, we would have to see, like, it's a condition that Yuta, Hakari, like, those culling game players, they have to die if we want to see this thing taking place, right? And the likelihood of both of them dying in order to see the merger, like, it's pretty low in my opinion. Like, maybe one of them will die by the end of the series, but both would be too cruel. Heck, of course, like Zoe mentioned, even just showing 100 million Japanese citizens, like, oh my god. And it kind of sucks because at the same time, I would really like to see this merger taking place, not just because this is something that Kenjaku has been planning and building up for thousands of years, but like the actual result of the merger, not to sound repetitive, I know we've already talked about this before, but the potential concepts of new cursed energy and what this just new thing will evolve to.
One of the most interesting things about the requirements to begin the merger ultimately comes down to if Itadori is that important, as we just kind of all yapped about for a good solid couple of minutes. The fact that the specific requirements of the merger don't also include him as someone that is required to be alive, because we know for a fact Itadori is considered a culling game player. So it is, for one point, very interesting that if this is really Kenjaku's goal to begin the merger, I think, one, we've already seen before he's not afraid to break his own rules or break the rules of the culling game to gain his own benefit. I think these being the rules have never truly been what he plans to actually do to accomplish the merger. And I think that kind of goes back to Quirkless's point of this. It definitely hasn't been the first culling game. There have been numerous small hints about that. But I think one clear indication is we have a character who was kind of off-screened and kind of brushed over that not too many people remember, but Dhruv Lakdwala, one of the main pillars of Sendai Colony before Yuta cleanly sliced him in half. this man was reborn not just once, but it's pretty much indicated that this was his second reincarnation. And it's also even further implied that way when you consider his original time was the Civil War of Wa, or the Great Rebellion of Wa, which was in the early 100s, 200s, and the Heian era happened around 700 AD, 900 AD. So this man was a sorcerer 800 years before the Heian era existed, which one has a whole lot of different indications as to if Tengen, Kenjaku, Sukuna even may date further back even before then. I want to clearly hear what you guys would have to say about that, but when it comes to Sukuna opposing the merger as well, I think at the end of the day, Sukuna and his hedonistic lifestyle, I don't think every single innocent civilian in Japan getting taken away from him, well, I don't think he necessarily cares about their well-being. I think that makes for a very bored Sukuna, and Sukuna doesn't like to be bored.
It's interesting you mentioned Druve, but there's also the thing with Yuji already being a Culling Games player the moment it starts, and he thinks it's due to his relationship with Sukuna, and ever since then, I figured that Sukuna probably took part in the last one. And we have no real reason, this is the same ritual. Whether or not the players are actually carried over, I wonder if it carried over for some of the other incarnated players, or it could simply be linked to their binding vow. But a lot of people seem to think that the original merger, or whatever the original Culling Games was, that is what resulted in Sukuna becoming the way he is now.
Yeah, I've also heard of those theories. The Druve one is a good point. Druve being born before, being active before the Heian era, and maybe even before the Nara period. I don't really know my sense of time of the history and whatnot, but yeah, that could be proof that the Culling Games started way before the quote-unquote peak of sorcery. So that's why not a lot of people have mentioned if the Culling Games has happened in Jujutsu textbooks or whatnot. But yeah, I've also heard theories like Quirkless said, where Sukuna partake in an older Culling Games, and he was crowned the victory. And then when you win, essentially, I guess you partake in the next one with Yuji ingesting his finger. I don't really know if I really believe in an older Culling Games happening before, just in the sense that I feel if it did, Gege would have already made it apparent or made it clear, but there's definitely clues that it did happen.
To your just to add on to what you said, the Nara period was directly right before the Heian period, which that's when Tengen was said to introduce sorcery to Japan. So it's interesting how Tengen introduces sorcery. Tengen, who knows where Tengen even came from before this. Tengen introduces sorcery, and then it begins basically the golden age of Jujutsu, the Heian era, right from that point on. So it could potentially be that there was a Tengen brought Jujutsu sorcery to Japan in the Nara period through the Culling Game, because we know specifically one of the biggest mentions or one of the biggest thought of reasons why Kenjaku even started the Culling Game to begin with was the massive chaos and the craziness. I know we're kind of saying it, he may or may not be all about chaos, but all of that kind of crazy conditioning was meant to influence and raise the levels of the sorcerers that took place in the Culling Game. So if you really think about it, that is also a great way for Tengen to say, hey, I've got this really cool thing called Jujutsu sorcery. If you guys want it, all you've got to do is participate in this really cool death game.
At the end of 136, Noop, you're right. I think Kenjaku, before starting the Culling Games, he did say the peak of sorcery, or the golden age of Jujutsu, is happening once again. And that's obviously referring to the Culling Games that he built right now. So yeah.
Did you have any final statements, Shinobi?
I'm trying to gather my thoughts here on this, because you guys bring up some good points.
Yeah, all good. No, all of you guys are bringing up great points.
Operator wants me to go into the timelines now, because I didn't even think about that with Druve. He was just an afterthought to me, but goddamn, he might be pretty important to what's actually going on here.
Yeah, we don't know how old Kenjaku is as an individual. We know he was around for at least 1,200 years if he was working with Tengen in the Heian era or the Nara period. But the interesting thing to me is that Tengen's barriers are required for Kenjaku to make the Culling Games in the first place. And Tengen already knows all the rules of the Culling Games, so I really do feel like there must have been some kind of ritual like this before, because the way Tengen refers to the ritual is it's a ritual that's been performed previously. They're oh, with a ritual like this, and they're the #1 barrier user in the entire country, probably the world. And it's very interesting to me that they come along and they're hey, let me preach Buddhism and Jujutsu, and built this Jujutsu maelstrom, where Japan is just the eye of the storm for cursed spirits and Jujutsu sorcerers, everywhere. It is one of those things we don't have a ton of information on, but I do like discussing the theories on it.
Yeah, I think one more thing to add that is kind of forgotten, but I think is very interesting just with all the kind of discussions that we're having, is the entire idea that if Tengen, we know Tengen needs to be reset every 500 years or so. And everyone was super duper worried about what would happen. Everyone said that Tengen may go off the rails. Tengen may become a different personality. We don't know exactly what will happen. Obviously, it's because Tengen would become like a cursed spirit and allow Kenjaku to absorb him. But like, is that truly the reason? I'm starting to like, was Tengen ultimately, that entire situation seems very suspect to me, especially more now that we know so much more about it. And that could be particularly because, is this the original base Tengen personality? Would the original Tengen maybe have dismantled the barriers because that would have been the better decision and then started things fresh? Is it because Tengen was corrupted that Tengen did what he did and put it all on the Jujutsu sorcerers? Did Tengen not actually need a new human female every 500 years for his immortality and he was using it for different reasons? There's just so many different things that Tengen, I still ultimately haven't written Tengen off of my book, honestly, as of being a very suspect individual and someone who may just be a POS, or the original POS. Because even Yuki calling him out the entire time is like, there's so many different steps that you could have chosen to take, and you didn't take any of them because you're selfish.
Oh my god, wait. One more thing I want to add, just what Noab said. I remember it was like chapter 222. It was the panel when Kenjaku's like talking to a TV, and he said something along the lines where, because obviously we know that Kenjaku and Tengen were, I guess, quote unquote friends. Like he, as he takes Tengen, he's like, goodbye, my friend, or something along those lines, right? And then I think in chapter, it's 222, he basically like despises Tengen for, it's left like very ambiguous, but he despises Tengen for someone who didn't take the next steps or didn't like want to risk their lives, like being selfish. So I don't know. That's just like, again, very ambiguous. We don't really know what that means. But Noab kind of saying that just reminded me of that chapter.
Sukuna even mentions Tengen mummifying his corpse as being ironic, and that's even something why why we don't even really know why as of yet. But this is why we need the Heian era flashback, because what is going on?
Yeah, we need an arc. We need like 10 chapters of just the Heian era, or even before that. Did anybody else have any final thoughts? Or
no, I think that's pretty much all.
Yeah, those are my
for
thoughts
me
for this.
Yeah, I think, like I said on the last bit, is just that, yeah, I do agree that Sukuna will oppose the merger. Just because I think, like I said, his hedonistic lifestyle, he's gonna want humans to suckle. He's not gonna want them all to.
I agree.
He's not gonna want them all to just disappear. So I think at the end of the day, Sukuna will oppose the merger, or whether that means fighting Kenjaku, fighting the merger if it does complete. I'm not sure what that will lead to, but I think Kenjaku and Sukuna are destined to betray one another at some point. There's no way that alliance is set in stone.
Yeah, I agree. It was always on shaky ground from the start. But yeah, that's it for this one, guys. Please check out Quirkless Shinobi, No Operator, and Fake Weeb, and subscribe to them. They make great content, but you probably already knew that if you came here. And yeah, if you liked the video, give it a like, but don't subscribe to me. Only subscribe to them. All right, bye, guys.